Hello, welcome back to the channel. My name is Jay and I'm a naval historian. And this week is the conclusion of a three-part series in which I review the Washington Naval Conference. And this week we're going to talk about the aftermath. I do have all the sources in the description, as there's about almost 30 articles that I gathered from JSTOR. And those citations, like I said, are in the description in case you want to review the sources for yourself. Additionally, you got two books, which I do have the links to in the description as well, so you can get them from bookshop.org if you like to. The first one, and unfortunately the most expensive one, hopefully you can find it used somewhere, is the Washington Conference 1921 to 1922, Naval Rhetoric, East Asian Stability, in the Road to Pearl Harbor, edited by Eric Goldstein and John Malware. Fantastic book. It has a great overview, not just of every, uh, the main players, the Brits, the us Americans, and the Japanese, but also explores a bit about the Italians and as well as the French who are involved, and get a better perspective of what was going on in the Japanese frame of mind around that, and also how they went from the publishment of Mahan's Influence of Sea Power upon history to in 1890 all the way up to Pearl Harbor is of course from Mahan to Pearl Harbor, the Imperial Japanese Navy in the United States by Sadao Asada. Also, great read, gives you some good background of what both the United States Navy and the Imperial Japanese Navy was thinking at that time. Again, links are in the description. So, as we said that last time, there were three main treaties that came out of the Washington Naval Conference: the nine power treaty, the four power treaty, and of course the big one everyone talks about, the five power treaty, which established that 6-6 or 10-10-6-4-4 ratio of capital ships, uh, sub carriers, the allowances for submarines, as well as the maximum requirements for cruisers and destroyers. The good thing about this is, especially as one who has become more and more of a pacifist, as I have studied all these wars, is that the Washington Naval Conference actually did ensure that there were not any uh, conflicts on the seas between the key treaty navies, particularly the ones that signed the five power treaty. And that lasted all the way up to December 7, 1941. The 1920s actually might have been one of the most globally peaceful eras ever due to the Washington Naval Conference. And of course, that was followed up in 1930 with the London Conference. It was scheduled to be as a follow up, and the point of contention here was the cruiser ratio, as the Americans and British thought that Japanese were gaining too many cruisers, and uh, Japan didn't think it had enough cruisers, so they were temporarily allowed a 10-10-7 ratio for cruisers to be built. And so, for every 10 British and American cruisers that were authorized, the Japanese could have seven. Now, it should be noted, even as at this stage in 1930, the U.S. was not at full treaty limits in its fleet. The combined 12 years of Republican administrations under Harding, Coolidge, and Hoover, they actually used those treaty limitations to minimize fleet expansion and development, and in fact used those funds elsewhere, namely to give to their rich buddies and promote businesses. Now, unfortunately, all good things do have to come to an end. And like I said, I do think Washington Naval Conference was one of the best things to happen to mankind. Um, but the end of that Washington Naval Conference era, it started in 1935. As you can tell from the London Conference of 1930, there were already some cracks, but by 1935, London Conference, those cracks were beginning to just crumble the entire arrangement. First of all, Japan had continued to object to the restrictions, believing that they were discriminated against and should be allowed to be a major player like the U.S. Navy and the Royal Navy. This has actually had worsened after the original Washington Naval Conference because a lot of the younger, a lot of the senior junior officers, so your lieutenants and lieutenant commanders, had kind of split into a fleet faction who opposed the treaty, and then the treaty faction, which supported a treaty. Now, a lot of these, by 1935, a lot of these fleet faction folks who were lieutenants and lieutenant commanders in 1920 have become flag officers. Um, and so they just were like, okay, we're done with this. We want to build what we have to need to build because our experiments with some of this hybrid stuff to get around the restrictions are just not well. Plus, by this stage, they had already started secretly developing larger aircraft carriers, battleships, specifically the Yamato class, and cruisers. Um, so, ironically, Yamamoto Izuruko, the famous admiral who was commander in chief of the combined fleet in 1940 through 40 until he was shot down in 1943, was actually a treaty faction guy. But he was popular enough with the fleet faction folks that he was kind of saved from assassination, especially as long as he stayed out with the combined fleet. Now, there was also a lack, because Japan pretty much walked out of every peace organization in 1935, there was a lack of continuation of the Washington treaties at that stage. And so what happened was everyone started gearing up, increasing the size of their ships and their fleet. One example, like I said, was the Yamato class of battleships. Um, Iowa class and his battleships were authorized to be designed as 45,000 tons of displacements, and also work began on the Montana class of battleships, which would have had uh, been a beefed up Iowa class. Now, by this stage, South Carolina and South Dakota class battleships were already designed, and they were based on those treaty limitations, and had already been authorized, so it was too late to change their designs. But planners took the Iowas as like, okay, we're going to build our best possible ships, and same in mind with the Montanas. And also, what happened after 1935 is pretty much any restriction was out the door, so they could start building as many submarines they started building as many submarines as they wanted, as many carriers they wanted, cruisers, destroyers, anything. And so, with that, the Second World War could be seen as inevitable after the collapse of the Washington Naval Treaty era, especially after 1935. I should also note that there was a restriction on the United States developing naval bases in the Western Pacific that I mentioned last year. And unfortunately, at that time, the Navy was a little short sighted. They were more concerned about building up their fleet. So they were short sighted and didn't really build up fortifications west of Hawaii. So that is, even though they were out of those treaty restrictions, they just didn't have the infrastructure in place to do that. Anyway, with all that said, I do think that this is still a very important era to look at, and does hold lessons for how we could potentially work our way into some sort of new major powers arms limitation treaty, uh, even when we're dealing with an administration that may or may not agree with that at this stage. But I'm still hopeful for the future. I still root for the diplomats as much as I study the lawyers. And with that, I'm going to end this series. Next week, I'll have a new one started up. I'm actually going to start figuring that out this weekend. Hopefully, does the weather cooperates and I can plan it out on my front porch and enjoy some nice weather this weekend. So, if you like this video, please give me a like. Share this with someone who you think would like it. Also, subscribe if you have not. And again, my weekly reminder: please be kind and respectful to everyone if you leave a comment. And until next week, I will see you later. Bye bye.